My name is Marie Antoinette. Once, I was Queen of France. But today, I speak not with a crown on my head, but with a heart that still remembers. This channel, Voices from the Past, gives a voice to those long silenced. And now, it is my turn to tell you my story. Not the one twisted by gossip or rewritten by history books, but the one I lived, the one I felt. A story of youth, of dreams, and of a fall no crown could soften. So listen closely, not to judge, not to pity, but to understand. I was born in Vienna, the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa, a girl among many siblings, not a future queen, merely a daughter. At home, I was carefree. I danced, played, sang. My German was clumsy, my handwriting messy, but I laughed loudly, and I loved my family deeply. Then one day, everything changed. I was just 14 when they told me, "You are to marry the Dauphin of France," a prince I had never met. In a country I didn't know, for an alliance, not for love. They changed my appearance, removed anything Austrian, and dressed me in French silk, like a gift wrapped for a new nation. At the border, I crossed a bridge. On one side, Maria Antonia, daughter of Vienna. On the other, Marie Antoinette, future Queen of France. I smiled, I bowed, but inside, I trembled. Versailles was grander than any palace I had seen, but cold. Not from the marble, but from the eyes watching me. I was too foreign, too free, too young. They said I was childish, that I laughed too much, that I didn't act like a queen, but I was trying, truly trying. And above all, I was still just a girl, far from home, alone. I became queen at just 19. The people cheered, but I knew it was not truly for me. It was for the crown I now wore, for the hope that the young couple would bring new light to France. Louis was kind, gentle, but shy. He preferred keys and locks to politics, and I was left to smile, wave, and wait. They called me frivolous, mocked my clothes, my hairstyles, my laughter. They called me l'Autrichienne, the Austrian woman, but it sounded more like bitch. They said I spent too much, danced too often, laughed too loudly. They wrote pamphlets, drew cruel cartoons, turned me into a symbol of waste, of arrogance, of everything they hated, but none of them saw me cry behind the palace walls. None of them saw me pray at night, begging for a child, for love, for meaning. It took years, but then, finally, a child, a daughter, my little Marie Thérèse. I held her and thought, maybe now they will love me. But I was wrong. The people were starving, bread was scarce, and no queen, no matter how kind her heart, could fill an empty belly. The year was 1789. Whispers turned into shouts. The streets of Paris filled with anger. The people demanded bread and blood. Versailles was no longer a palace. It was a gilded cage. Every knock on the door made my heart stop. Every letter carried threats. We tried to believe it would pass, that the cries of the people would calm, but the walls of the Bastille fell, and with them the old world crumbled. I was no longer a queen in their eyes. I was an enemy, a foreigner, a thief of their happiness. The mobs came, tens of thousands of voices, echoing hatred. They broke into Versailles. I fled with my children, through secret corridors, trembling in the dark. Louis tried to reason, tried to hold on to the crown, but the crown was already lost. We were taken from Versailles to Paris, to the Tuileries Palace. But it wasn't a palace anymore. It was a prison with golden curtains and no freedom. And deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. They called it the flight to Varennes. But it was not flight, it was hope. In the summer of 1791, we fled. Disguised in the dark of night, I held my children close, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. The carriage creaked. Every hoofbeat echoed like thunder. We were so close, but fate, or recognition, stopped us. A postmaster saw through our disguise. He bowed, then locked the doors. They dragged us back to Paris, not as monarchs, but as criminals. From that day, I was no longer Your Majesty. I was the Widow Capet, stripped of title, of dignity, of the very name I was born with. Louis stood trial first. They called him a tyrant. They called it justice. I watched him mount the scaffold, watched the blade fall. I did not scream. I did not cry. I was a queen, even without a crown. Then they came for me. They accused me of crimes unspeakable, lies twisted into truth by rage and fear. They separated me from my son, told him to speak against me. He was 8. I stood in that cold courtroom, alone, facing a sea of eyes that wanted my death. But I spoke clearly, not to plead, but to remind them that even a condemned woman has a voice. After the trial, the days became slower, colder, not because of the cell, but because I knew the end was near. The walls were bare, the floor stone. But the silence, that was the loudest. They no longer called me by name. I was simply the prisoner. I was watched day and night. Not for fear I would escape, but because they wanted to see me fall apart. But I didn't. Each morning I stood, brushed my hair, straightened what was left of my dress. I would meet death with dignity. I missed my children. Every breath without them was a wound. I prayed not for myself, but for them. That history would one day tell them the truth, not of the queen, but of the mother. The priest came. They allowed me confession. In that final moment, I didn't speak of politics, or thrones, or revolutions, only of love, of regret, of my wish to hold my son one last time. At dawn, they brought me out. I climbed into the cart, hands bound, head held high. The crowd jeered, spat, mocked, but I looked forward, not with pride, but with peace, because I knew, though they could take my crown, my name, even my breath, they could never take the truth. I climbed the scaffold with steady steps, not as a queen, not even as a woman of noble birth, but as a soul, stripped of titles, of jewels, of everything, except the truth I carried in my heart. They tied my hands. The executioner looked away. Even he who had seen so many deaths hesitated. I looked at the blade, the final end, swift, cold, unforgiving. But I was not afraid. I thought of Louis, of our children, thought of my mistakes, and of the small moments no history book would ever write, like a mother's kiss, a quiet apology, a whispered lullaby. And as the executioner asked for my forgiveness for stepping on my foot, I simply said, "It's nothing." Those were my final words. Then, silence. But not forever. Because I know, as long as there are those who seek truth, who listen with both heart and mind, my story will live on, not as a queen who fell, but as a woman who stood tall in her final hour. Hey. And if you wish to hear more voices from the past, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. History is never truly silent, it simply waits to be heard. Au revoir, my dear friends.